So we have here King Arthur whole wheat, 100% whole wheat sprouted flour. Now, to make this, what they do is they sprout the flour, dry it, then grind it. And what's explained in this book by Peter Reinhardt is that it allows you to get artisan tasting breads quickly. And what are artisan breads, I should mention, I guess? Well, artisan breads are breads that usually have taken a long time to make because the fermenting process or the process where the yeast is working on the flour is greatly extended, usually by having a a smaller amount of yeast and a longer time, or maybe even taking the bread and have it overnight in a refrigerator. One of his previous books outlined that. But he calls this a bread revolution because he's found out that the taste that was developed by this long fermentation process basically is now here in this bread, in this flour, because the flour has been sprouted. So it gives us a quicker way to make higher quality breads. Now, of course, this is a small package, so this was like $3.84, so this was about $2 a pound. Well, I can buy a whole 5-pound bag of unbleached white flour for $2, but this isn't that. And so one thing I want to mention about this that is really interesting is I found it, at least in my family, that they like this sprouted whole wheat flour, even if I use 100% of this as flour, where they would not like a bread I made out of regular 100% whole wheat flour. Usually I would have to dilute the whole grain flour for them to like it. But this, you can use it completely. And so it's a really good way to get people to eat whole wheat that normally wouldn't eat it because it tastes so good. And it just has a better texture and just better, they say great tasting, but that's just the idea. It has a better flavor profile, I guess you would say. So what we're going to do this time, just for the fun of it, they recommend doing this, so I just thought I would try it. We're going to try a recipe half and half. We're going to use half this and half regular flour, and I'm going to make rolls, and I'm going to be making them in my bread machine. Here's the insert to my bread machine. We're going to just go through quickly doing this, and I'm going to whip up some rolls for dinner, and we're going to try them out, and we'll get a vote from the family to see how good they are. But I know they're going to love them because we've done this before. It was a different brand, and I'm sure King Arthur probably sells this in a much larger size that would make it more economical too, but they probably, at this point, a lot of people don't know exactly what it is, so it probably isn't a really big seller, but it's very encouraging to see it in the regular grocery store. It was right with all the other flour. It wasn't like in an organic section or special, section or anything. It was just right there with all the other flours. So let's give this thing a try, and we're going to make some half and half sprouted wheat and regular flour rolls for dinner. Here's the recipe we're going to use. We're going to do the 1.5 pound loaf. So instead of using 3 cups of bread flour, just to make it easier, I'm going to use a cup of the sprouted flour. I think I'll use 2 cups of the sprouted flour and 1 cup of the white milk. I mean the white flour. And again, if you watch my other video on using the bread machine, the order you put them in is important, especially if you're going to be using the timer, okay? And it's important that if you are going to use the timer, that you separate where the yeast is sitting in the machine from where the salt is sitting. If you put the salt and yeast together and then set the timer in 13 minutes, you could kill the yeast. Okay, so it's best to keep them separate. But we're going to you add the water first, then you add the flour. You're using dry milk because, again, that's the function of the timer. If you didn't want to use dry milk, you would just use as much of the 1 1/8 cups plus 1 tablespoon of regular milk. But the dry milk is used again, and it's important with this that you keep it dry. In other words, if you put the water in, the 3 cups of flour, there will be a dry area where you can put the milk. These other 3 ingredients, sugar, salt, and butter, don't matter, but the dry yeast should be away from the salt. So it's best to keep the yeast and the dry milk separate and dry. So we're going to put those all in and turn our machine on. Now we can see it here. It's interesting. And I'm not sure if you can see it in the video. It's so subtle, but the whole wheat sprouted flour is beige, and the irregular unbleached white flour is white, of course, but there's a beige color to it, much different than darker whole wheat flour you would see. So here we see inside the bread machine, this is the yeast, this coloring here, and this white area is both the sugar and the salt. We've got our butter in there, and everything that we need in there now. Now, I just found out that we're having dinner a little earlier than expected, so I've switched from my regular yeast to highly active yeast, and this really works a lot quicker. So this will allow me to get this bread in the oven quicker. I'm going to do part of the rising in the oven as it cooks. In other words, I'm going to start with a cold oven, and that ramping up in temperature will help the yeast grow as well. The bread machine is going to heat everything, mix it up and heat it all up and start the rise. Then I'm going to take them out, make rolls, put them in a pan and into a cold oven and turn it on, and they'll rise the rest of the way. Well, here's my bread machine. It makes a lot of noise. I think it's on its last legs, but something you'll notice about this is you may have to add a little more flour. If your dough is sticky, you might have to add a little more flour. If it's overly dry, you might have to add a little more water. In other words, the sprouted wheat flour does behave a little differently than white unbleached flour. But this looks like it's going to be fine. Okay, I'm going to do another little trick to aid in my getting this to go quicker. I'm going to turn my cycle onto bake here, and once it goes above 100 degrees, unfortunately, some people have great ovens and they can just set them for like 80 degrees and do proofing. This oven, even though it was a floor model that's supposed to do everything, it doesn't have a proof mode. So anyway, as soon as the temperature goes above 100, I'm going to stop it. Then I'm going to open it and put my rolls in. And that will give me a non-lethal temperature to rise my yeast in, especially with the door open. Yeast starts to die around 140 degrees. So here we have our nice warm dough, and you can see it's not sticky to the touch. That's sticky. And all I'm going to do is take little pieces out, roll them up into a ball, and put them in this pan. Something in there. I always use parchment paper because it makes life so much easier. When I get done, I can take the parchment paper out and set it on a counter to cool, and the pan will be really virtually clean. Plus, the bread never will stick to the parchment paper. So, parchment paper to me is the way to go. I'd show you my rolling technique, but I'm not that good at making rolls, so we're going to skip that part of the technique of doing it. I have to learn it better, but I'm going to attempt to make them even amounts and put them in there, and we'll go from there. You can see that the bread has risen a little. We only did 13 minutes, but now we're going to turn the oven on to 350, and they're going to rise quite a bit in this first stage of cooking. We hope. here are the rolls at 20 minutes. Okay, we're up to 350 of course by now, but you can see the rolls have risen nicely. So we're going to continue to cook them until they're brown, and the internal temperature is at least 195, perhaps more, like 205 with the whole wheat. We want to make sure it's not doughy in the center. So here's our finished product. This was reading above 205 when I took it out of the oven, but I just wanted to show you how I pulled the parchment paper out and the pan. A nice pan that's hot, and I got to remember not to touch. You know, I'll still wash it out, but you don't have any bread stuck to it, which is really nice. That would go with cookies or anything else. Oh, there's a breadcrumb. I see one. While most people go for crusty bread, my wife especially likes it soft. So I buttered both the tops and the bottoms while they were hot to make the bread soft. And I didn't make a lot of rolls. I find that, you know, when you're making them at home, bread tends to go bad quicker. Now, one way to take care of that, which I didn't do this time, is to use honey instead of sugar. Honey has natural antibiotic properties in it, and while it doesn't affect the yeast, it will affect things later, and your bread will actually stay fresher longer. It will have that honey taste so as well, which is kind of nice too. We'll do the next batch with honey. Okay, here we have our final results. So let's take a bite. And it's wonderful. Perfect rolls to go with some spaghetti. There we go. Sprouted whole wheat flour. Please give it a try. You'll love it.